Friends, we have reached one of the culminating parts of our story. After the tense events of the previous episode, our heroes will face new challenges. Will they be able to cope with all the difficulties and find long-awaited peace? In this episode, we will see very sharp plots. But the past is not so easy to leave behind. New threats will hang over them, forcing them to take up arms again. Get ready for unexpected plot twists, dramatic events, and of course, do not forget to click this damn subscribe button so that this YouTube can recommend you new parts of this story. The most important thing is hope. Chapter 7. Jorge and Smith nodded their heads. Ryan pressed the microphone button and gave the command. "Come on, come on, come on," he said. He heard the noise of helicopter blades overhead and saw the aircraft descend to a point about 10 feet off the ground near Lear's plane. He saw 3 cables come out of the helicopter and 3 people descend, which reminded him of a passage from an old Jethro Tull song. Like spiders going down ropes in freefall, a 30-rupee clip for a business card, led at the embassy ball. As they descended, the men crept toward the buildings, staying in the shadows. The helicopter took to the air, and all hell broke loose as a minigun opened fire, cutting off the nose of the Learjet. Suddenly, the guards jumped out of the buildings and ran into a wall of red-hot lead, fired from the AK-47S, carried by Ian, Cap, and Buster. The 3 men rushed toward the buildings, kicking in doors and firing as they went. Ryan could hear Beverly radioing instructions to the men. "Whiskey Delta 4, bogey at 10 o'clock, she said, followed by a brief burst of fire. While she was giving instructions, the helicopter opened fire on the cars, smashing the engines. Ryan was amazed that Bob had been smart enough not to fire on the gas tanks. However, the thought that the cars might catch fire never left him. The last thing he wanted was for the fireball to alert local law enforcement. He looked at Jorge and Smith and signaled to move. At that moment, he noticed Elmer and a guard entering the building. They ran toward the building, firing at the guards as they approached them. Ryan raised his night vision goggles as they approached the building. Just as he was ready to kick the door in, it opened and a large man stood on the threshold, stunned. Ryan, wasting no time, put a lead into him. They rushed inside and saw Elmer with one arm around Sarah's upper body. He had put her to death. "Watch the door," Ryan said to Jorge. Jorge silently turned toward the door to cover it. A staccato of AK-47 gunshots and the sound of a minigun could be heard before them. A few scattered gunshots, screams and yells were heard, but they soon subsided. Ryan and Smith spread out, guns at the ready. "Come any closer and I'll do what it takes," Elmer threatened, angering Ryan even more. Sarah cried out, trying to free herself. "Boy, didn't anyone ever tell you not to bring a knife to a gunfight?" asked Ryan. He watched Elmer trying to get into position and waited for the opportune moment. Ryan knew he only had one chance. Soon Elmer's foot showed. Ryan took aim, hitting Elmer in the shin. He cried out and dropped the knife. Sarah, freeing herself, ran to Ryan and Smith while Elmer screamed in pain on the floor. "Daddy," she shouted, holding out her arms. "Where's baby Ryan?" asked Ryan to his daughter. "In the next room," she said. "He's been drugged with something." "Take him and get them out of here," Ryan said to Smith. "Go!" Smith holstered his gun and ran into another room where a small unconscious boy lay on a bed. He picked the boy up and carried him into the main room. Sarah was next to him. "Come on, Ryan. We gotta go," Smith said. "Get them out of here," Ryan said. "I'll be right there. Just go." Smith looked at Elmer, nodded his head, and then spoke into the microphone. "KP Whiskey Delta. Target secured," he said. "Get over here now." "Roger that," Bill said. Smith led Sarah out of the building. Jorge looked at Ryan. "Go, Jorge," Ryan said. "Cover them up. I'll be right there." Jorge nodded his head and left with Smith. When they left, Ryan walked over to Elmer and threw the knife away. Elmer looked at Ryan and fear was reflected on his face. "Please, Ryan," he begged. "Don't touch me. I have money, a lot of it. It's yours, all of it. Just please don't touch me. I'm begging you." "You're not so full of piss and vinegar now, are you? I don't need your money, asshole," Ryan said. "I got enough of my own." He threw a swift punch at Elmer, making him cry out in pain. "That's for ruining my marriage." He kicked Elmer again, twice. "That's for kidnapping my daughter and grandson." He delivered another kick with his foot. "And that's only because you're a vile, maggot-infested piece of shit, and I hate you to the bone. Remember what I promised you, boy?" Elmer nodded his head. "So, what do you think?" asked Ryan. "Do you like this little war? Are you having fun? Eh? Answer me, damn it!" "Please stop," Elmer wheezed. "Grow the fuck up," Ryan growled. "It's your own fault." He put the gun away and pulled out another toy, making Elmer's eyes widen. "Do you believe in God?" asked Ryan, seeing the St. Christopher medal around Elmer's neck. Elmer nodded his head. "Good. Because you're going to meet him. Very soon," said Ryan, making Elmer wet his pants. Ryan chuckled when he saw that. He walked up behind Elmer and grabbed his head. A few minutes later, Ryan approached the van, having first cleaned the knife on Elmer's pants. He saw Smith at the open back door, who gestured for him to hurry. He reached the van in no time, took one last look around to make sure everyone was safe, and stepped inside. When the van passed the gate, he pulled a remote from his pocket, lifted the protective cover, and pressed a button. 2 muffled explosions were heard, followed by the sound of falling trees. Looking around, he saw that they had effectively blocked the gate. That should slow down anyone trying to get in or out, he thought. "Whiskey Delta 7, he said into the microphone. "Situation summary. Everyone is present and accounted for," Jim said in response. "All buildings secured, 1 casualty." Ryan's heart dropped. "Who?" he asked gruffly. "Machine gunner," Jim said. Ryan realized he was addressing Bob. "Captain says it's just a minor injury. He's fine." Ryan breathed a sigh of relief. But it still hurt to hear that his son-in-law was hurt. "He did good, boss," Jim said, and Ryan was relieved. More than that, he was proud of the young man. "Roger that, Whiskey Delta 7, Ryan said. "Return to base. Maintain radio silence." He heard the click of a keyed microphone in acknowledgement and turned off his comm unit. He turned to Beverly, who was trembling. "Are you okay?" he asked. She nodded her head. "Did I get it all right?" she asked. "You did better than you did," he said. "You were perfect. We couldn't have done it without you." He held her until she stopped shaking. He looked at Sarah and Ryan. She was holding the boy in her arms and crying. He let go of Beverly and walked over to his daughter. "Are you okay?" he asked. She nodded her head and cried. "Yes, thanks to you." "Again," she cried. He put his arms around her as she sobbed and comforted her as best he could. "I'm worried about baby Ryan," she said between sobs. Beverly walked over to them and looked at the boy, then brought her ear to his mouth. "He's breathing," she said. "Maybe he's just sleeping." "What did they give him?" "I don't know," she said. "They kept him under something the whole time we were there." "We'll have Cap take a look when we get home," Ryan said. He looked at his daughter's tear-drenched face. "Did they do anything to you?" he asked. "No, but they were planning something bad," she said. "I overheard them talking about a gang fight and then selling me to some Mexican cartel if you didn't show up." "You don't have to worry about them anymore," Ryan said. He sat on the bench hugging his 2 women while Jorge drove home. He considered telling her about Bob, but decided to wait until they got home. Looking back at the others, he realized they were relaxing in their own way and said nothing. After they crossed the state line, Bob turned on the police scanner again and heard chatter that the local cops were on their way out of Carlsbad. "ET is 90 minutes, they heard one of the officers say. Of course, Ryan knew that didn't necessarily mean other officers weren't closer. He hoped that by the time the locals arrived on the scene, they would be home. "Jorge, go ahead and turn on the headlights," he said, "and watch your speed. The last thing we need is to get pulled over by traffic police." "Got it," Jorge replied. There wasn't much driving on this road, but that didn't mean a state trooper wasn't sitting in a speed trap waiting for an unsuspecting car. Border Patrol agents were also known to patrol some of these roads. They seemed to hold their breath the whole way back, but finally they pulled into his driveway. When Jorge stopped, Ryan exhaled. "Home sweet home," he said. They climbed out of the van and entered the house. Ryan carried his grandson upstairs and laid him on one of the beds. He tucked the boy in and kissed the top of his head. As he went downstairs, he noticed that Beverly had unlocked the back door, letting the others inside. Cap put his arm around Bob's uninjured shoulder and led him over to a chair in the kitchen. Ryan saw the torn shirt. His heart clenched with pain for the boy. He put his hand on Bob's healthy arm. "It's just a scratch," Cap said. "The bullet ricocheted off the door panel and hit him. He needs a couple stitches, but otherwise he's fine." Ryan nodded his head, leaned over and kissed the boy on the top of his head. He grabbed a second six-pack of beer and cigars from the counter and started handing them out. Sarah looked into the kitchen and saw Bob sitting there while Cap washed his wound. She shrieked and rushed over to him while everyone watched. "Oh my God," she exclaimed. "You've been hurt. I didn't know you were there." "Who do you think made all that ruckus outside, shooting everything in sight?" asked Cap. "Was that you?" she asked. Bob nodded his head, a faint smile appearing on his face. She wrapped her arms around him and showered him with kisses. Why were you there?" "I couldn't just sit at home and wait," he said. "If something happened to you or little Ryan and all I did was sit at home, I could never get over it." "Oh, honey," she said. "I love you so much. You are now officially my new hero." He chuckled when she said that. "Just wait until I bring you home. I'll show you how much I appreciate what you did." He smiled at the thought of that. "Why don't you let me finish up here, and I'll go check on your son," Cap said. Sarah nodded her head, gave Bob another kiss, and went out to the front room where everyone had already opened their beers and lit cigars. "You know," Cap said quietly when she was gone, "the old man really thinks well of you." Bob looked at him, shocked. "And so do the others. You've earned their respect today." "How?" asked Bob. "Well, you stood up and fought for your family," Cap said, "and spilled some of your own blood in the process. That means a lot to tough guys like Ryan, Bill, Buster, and Ian." "And the others?" asked Bob. "You've earned our respect, Bob. Sorry, Gunner. That's your new name now, at least among us," Cap said. Bob smiled. "I like it," he said. "Gunner. Yeah, I can live with that." "You know what else might be useful?" asked Cap, stitching up Bob's arm. "What?" asked Bob. "If you started calling Ryan Dad. He thinks of you as the son he never had," Cap said. "Really?" asked Bob. Cap nodded his head, wiping and bandaging Bob's arm. "I can see it in his face," Cap said. "The way he looks at you, the way he talks to you. He was like that with Dawson, too." "Who was this Dawson?" asked Bob. "He was on our team for several years," Cap said. "He had a wife and 3 kids at home. They got in a bind, and he joined the squad to get out of debt. He ended up throwing himself on a grenade without even thinking. Ryan tried to stop him, but it was too late. He's carried the guilt of that ever since. Always thought it should have been him instead of Dawson." "Damn," Bob said. "I never knew that." "There's a lot you don't know about this old man," Cap said. "Maybe it's time you got to know him better." Bob nodded his head. "Maybe you're right," he said. Cap finished dressing, gathered his gear, and stood up. "I better go check on your son," Cap said. "Go easy on your arm for a few days. It might start itching after a while. I'll give you some antiseptic cream. Thanks," Bob said. Cap nodded his head and went upstairs. Ryan walked over to the table and sat down. He opened a beer and held it out to Bob, then offered him a cigar. "You know, this is probably the only time Beverly will ever let you smoke in here, so enjoy it while you can," he said with a smile. "Thanks, Dad," Bob said. "You don't mind if I call you that, do you?" Ryan held back tears and shook his head. "Not at all, son," he said. "In fact, I'd be a little annoyed if you didn't." Bob chuckled. "I've seen you when you get annoyed," Bob said. Ryan smiled and shook his head. "No, you've seen me lose my temper," Ryan said. "Still. Jim says you did a pretty good job out there. According to him, you stood right in the doorway of the helicopter after you got hit and kept shooting. Tell me, why did you come here?" "Like I told Sarah, I just couldn't sit at home knowing that she and Ryan were in danger," Bob said. "I couldn't live with myself if something happened to them, and I'd just sit at home and wait to hear from someone." Ryan nodded his head. "I can respect that," Ryan said. "You're a man, a father and a husband. You wanted fatherly justice, and you got it, and I'm proud to call you son." Bob stared at him, shocked. Ryan smiled, nodded his head, and stood up. "Well, I have a little problem to solve tonight," Ryan said. "Why don't you come by and join us for a while? You'll see how the story unfolds." Bob took his beer and cigar and followed Ryan into the front room. Ryan picked up his beer and tapped the bottle with his knife to get everyone's attention. Everyone stopped what they were doing and looked at him. He set the beer aside, put the knife back in its sheath, then took the cigar out of his mouth and held it out to Jim. He gestured for Beverly to join him. She walked over to him and looked up at him, wondering what he was going to do. In stunned silence, he dropped to one knee, took her hand, and raised his eyes to her. "Beverly," he began, "I never thought I could love another woman again, but you came along and made me feel whole again, and for that, I will always and forever love you with all my heart. So in front of all these witnesses, I ask, will you marry me and make me the happiest man on earth?" "Oh my God, Ryan," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, my darling Ryan, I will marry you. I love you so much." He got to his feet and everyone applauded. They hugged right in front of everyone. "Get a room, huh?" shouted Buster, causing everyone to laugh. "There's one upstairs," Ryan said to new laughter. "Oh my God, it's going to rumble around here tonight," Buster said. That caused even more laughter. Ryan and Beverly hugged and kissed again. "So, when's the wedding?" shouted Smith. "Well, I've got a few loose ends to tie up, and then it's all finished," Ryan said. "If it's okay with the lady of the house," he added. "Damn, we're not even married yet, and he's already wringing her rags," Ian shouted. Everyone laughed again. "Well, you know what they say," Ryan said. "You can be plucked by a chicken if you don't mind the chicken pecking you." "It's more than okay," Beverly said. She looked around before continuing. "Just so you all know, Ryan in our family definitely wears the pants. I want to tell you that this wonderful man saved my life once. I thought I had lost everything, but then he came along and fixed everything." "It's what my daddy does best," Sarah said as she hugged Beverly. "And if you don't mind, I'd like to call you Mom from today. After all, you risked your life for me and little Ryan, and my own mother never did." Beverly hugged Sarah and both women shed a few tears together. "Of course, darling," she said. Suddenly they heard the phone ring. "Wait a minute," Smith shouted. "This is for me. Everyone be quiet." Everyone fell silent as Smith answered the call. "Yes, Smith," he said. They had only heard his part of the conversation. "Wow, what's that? In New Mexico? Really? That sounds awful. Okay, call Jones and have him meet me there. I'll be there as soon as I can." "Okay, bye." He ended the conversation and looked at the group. "What was that?" asked Ryan. "Local New Mexico police officers called the FBI field office in El Paso," Ryan said. "They want me to investigate an attack on a corporate center. They said the place looks like a war zone. There are no survivors. You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you?" "We?" asked Jim. "Oh, hell no," he added under his laughter. "That's what I thought," Smith said. "Anyway, I'd better get cleaned up and hit the road. You wouldn't mind making some coffee, would you?" "I'd be glad to," Beverly said. While she was making coffee, Ryan spoke. "There are 2 more bedrooms upstairs, guys, and the couch isn't too bad either. We can settle in for the night," he said. Everyone split up and found a place to sleep. Ryan met Smith at the front door as he prepared to leave. "Do you have everything?" he asked. "Yeah," Smith said. "Good thing you made me leave my service pistol and badge here." "Are you going to be okay?" asked Ryan. "You put your career on the line today." "Let me worry about my career," Smith said. "It's going to be fine. I'll call you tomorrow, okay? You'll be home?" "I'll be flying east with Sarah, Bob and Ryan, but you can still reach me by phone," Ryan said. Smith nodded his head. "Okay," he said. "I'll be in touch." "Thanks again," Ryan said. "For everything." "You're welcome," Smith said, shaking Ryan's hand. Tired, Ryan closed the door and headed upstairs where his wife-to-be was waiting for him. He knew they would only get a few hours of sleep before she would have to get up and tend to her chickens. "I need to rest," he said to himself as he lay down next to Beverly. "Good night, my future husband," Beverly said as she kissed his face. He returned her kiss and put his arm around her shoulders. She was so soft and warm. "Good night, my future wife," he replied before falling asleep. The next morning, Ryan woke up to the smell of bacon coming from the kitchen. He rubbed his eyes and looked at the clock. 7 a.m. Damn, he thought. Beverly liked to get up early to feed her chickens. He glanced over to her side of the bed and noticed that she had already left. He didn't even realize she was up. He crawled out of bed, took a quick shower, and dressed in his usual clothes. And then he saw the note on the dresser. "My dear Ryan," the letter began. "I got up early to go take care of the chickens. I have some deliveries to make in the morning, so I won't be gone until 12 o'clock. I knew you were tired from last night, so I let you sleep in. Sarah said she would make you breakfast. I know you were planning on taking the kids home today. If you have to leave before I get home, just call. I'll be fine. Love you so much." The note was signed, "To your future, happy wife Beverly." He smiled and shook his head. She was so devoted to those chickens, he thought. How could she do what she did last night, and yet get up so early to tend them, he wondered. As he came downstairs, he heard the television playing. Buster saw him coming down and invited him to come into the front room. Little Ryan was sitting on the couch with Buster and Ian, so he picked him up and sat him on his lap and sat in the chair. The boy's eyes were fixed on the TV like everyone else in the room. "Check it out, man," Buster said, turning up the volume a little. Knight Petroleum shares fell this morning as news broke of a possible attack on a company-owned oil field in southeastern New Mexico, the anchor said. State law enforcement officials are working with FBI agents to find out what really happened. We're taking you to a press conference being held at the camp. The scene switched to a report filmed at the campsite. Agent Smith's concerned face appeared on the screen. "We're still gathering evidence trying to determine what happened here overnight," he said. "How many people were killed or injured in the attack?" shouted one of the reporters. "We are not releasing that information until next of kin have been notified," Smith said. "Were there any survivors or witnesses?" another reporter asked. Smith shook his head. "No," he said. "At any rate, none of the ones who showed up. No survivors have been found in the camp. Is it possible that there are some substances involved?" a third reporter asked. "We are exploring all possible scenarios," Smith said. "What about terrorism?" shouted another reporter. "As I said, we're exploring all possibilities," Smith said. "Could this be related to the ongoing investigation into former CEO Jacob Knight, or the injury to interim CEO Lisa Knight?" another reporter asked. "We're not ruling out any of those possibilities," Smith said. "If so, how does that affect any of these investigations?" the first reporter asked. "You'll have to ask that question of the federal prosecutor prosecuting these cases," Smith said. "I'm here to investigate a possible crime, not speculate about the implications of a current case that is being or has been litigated." "Gosh, that Smith is one hell of a pickle," Buster said. Everyone agreed. "Can you tell us about how this came to light?" one of the reporters asked. "This is a fairly remote area, and as far as we can tell, the nearest neighbor is several miles away." Smith turned to a local deputy sheriff, who had stepped to the podium. "The nearest neighbor is actually about 12 miles away," the deputy said. "He happened to be outside when he thought he heard gunshots coming from that direction. He called 911, and it took officers up to an hour and a half to determine that was the scene." "What took you so long?" one of the reporters asked. "Look around," the deputy said. "There are very few roads here, very few people. There's a lot of territory to cover. It's not a big city, you know." "Agent Smith, have you been in contact with any of the executives at Knight Petroleum?" the reporter asked. "No, I haven't," he said. "We tried to contact them, but we were told they were unavailable." "Don't you find that a little strange?" a second reporter asked. "We find a lot of things about this incident strange," he said in response. "That's all for now. We'll get back to you when we have something new. Thank you." He stepped back, and the scene switched to a reporter speaking into a microphone. "And we just heard from FBI Special Agent John Smith, who said they are looking at several possible scenarios and at this time cannot share any real information," the girl said. Interestingly, 2 damaged SUVs with Mexican license plates were previously spotted, as well as the damaged fuselage of a Lear airplane registered to Knight Petroleum. We were able to confirm that this plane is one of a small fleet used to transport executives and VIPs. Back to you, George. Thank you, Sherry, said the man reading the news as the scene switched back to the studio. We're heading to Central City, where reporters are waiting to hear from a Knight Petroleum spokesman. The scene shifted again to the briefing room. There was a podium in front of a curtain with the Knight Petroleum logo on it. As they watched, an attractive brunette took her seat behind the podium and began reviewing her notes. Sarah, seeing that everyone was focused on the news on the TV, started bringing plates of scrambled eggs and bacon into the living room. She spread a rug on the coffee table and placed a smaller plate of food on it for little Ryan. "Sorry, honey," Bob said. "Do you need help?" No, I get it," she said. "Stay tuned, boys." The men started on the food as soon as it was in front of them. Ryan sat the boy down in front of the coffee table so he could eat his breakfast. As they watched, the brunette looked at the reporters gathered in the room and spoke. "As you all know, reports have surfaced this morning that a retreat owned and operated by Knight Petroleum has allegedly been attacked by an unknown person or persons," she said, reading from her script. "There have been reports of casualties, but we are not releasing names pending notification of next of kin. Of course, we extend our condolences to the families of these individuals, and will do everything we can to minimize the impact on the families of the victims. We're working with federal and New Mexico authorities to get the full circumstances of the case. We will now take some questions from members of the press." The reporters all raised their hands, and the brunette picked one of them in the front row. The report from the scene states that a damaged Lear aircraft registered to Knight Petroleum has been recovered from the scene for analysis. The reporter began. "I understand from your own records that this plane is one of several used by your company to transport executives, board members, and VIPs. Were any of your executives or board members on this plane or in the camp at the time? And if so, what was their disposition?" "I don't have that information," the brunette said. "At this point, I don't know who was on the plane. It may have been empty and just made a refueling stop. Our flight crews do that sometimes and often use the facilities for overnight stays. We also keep a small staff on site for maintenance and security." "You don't know where your own executives or board members are?" pressed the reporter. "I didn't say that," the brunette said. "I just said I didn't know if the executives were on the plane or at the facility. It's entirely possible there were no passengers. But the flight plan we found shows that the plane left here the day before yesterday and the destination was New Mexico," another reporter said. "Also, according to the manifest we obtained, the plane had 9 passengers on board, the maximum number it could safely carry. Can you explain that?" "I can't explain it," the brunette said. "I'll have to check with management to verify that claim." "Why haven't we heard from your board of directors, Mr. Elmer Jenkins?" shouted another reporter. "Or from anyone else on the board?" "I can't answer that question," the brunette said, eliciting groans from the reporters. Another reporter stood up. "There have been several reports from the UK over the past day that the body of one of your board members, one Mr. Colin Blackstone, has been found in Manchester, England," the reporter said. "How do you respond to that?" "We just got those messages too," the brunette said. "Mr. Blackstone recently returned to England to deal with family matters. We have nothing further to report except that we are working with the authorities in that country to solve the case. That concludes today's conference, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much." She turned and left the podium, clearly agitated. Reporters shouted questions as she left, but she paid them no attention. Ryan turned to Jorge and Bill. "Blackstone," Ryan said. "That's the guy Timmy said was the one who introduced him to Jake, remember?" Jorge nodded his head. "What?" asked Sarah. "Yeah," Ryan said. "Timmy was the one who got into Lisa. According to him, this Blackstone offered him a job, took him to meet Jake, and then handed him a gun, instructions, and payment. I asked Elmer about it, and he said Blackstone had to go home for family reasons." "Bloody hell," Ian said. "I agree," Ryan said, "but we have another problem." "What's that?" asked Buster. "If Sheriff Coltrane has seen this report, he will be looking for answers," Ryan said. "Is this the sheriff who came out last night and walked us to the state line?" asked Jorge. Ryan nodded his head. "Same thing," Ryan said. Agent Smith and I spoke to him directly. Russell T. Coltrane may seem like a country sheriff, but he's very smart. He'll put two and two together, and I suspect he'll be out soon. Then we should probably become less conspicuous, Buster said. Agreed, mate, Ian said. If Gunner helps me, I can have the helicopter ready to take off in 15 minutes, Jim said. Bill and I should get going too, Jorge said. He got a good look at me and my van. Ryan thought for a moment and nodded his head. Okay, he finally said. Let's go. Everyone got up and gathered their things. Bob went out with Jim and helped get the helicopter ready to fly. Ryan walked Jorge and Bill to the van. Do me a favor, okay? Ryan asked Jorge. Sure, anything, Jorge said. Could you please let me know when Jake's next court appearance is? Asked Ryan. I think he'll be in court tomorrow, Jorge said. I'll have Bill check the to-do list on the way back, and we'll let you know. Can you do that from your van? Asked Ryan. Jorge smiled. Of course, he said. That's why they call it mobile. These days, we can access the internet from anywhere. Welcome to the 21st century. Okay, Ryan said. Thank you. No problem, Jorge said. We'll be in touch. They said their goodbyes and Ryan watched them drive away. He went back to the house and met Ian, Cap, and Buster. They had already packed their things and were getting ready to leave. Ryan shook their hands. Thanks, guys, Ryan said. I really appreciate your help. No worries, buddy, Ian said. Just don't forget to invite us to the wedding. You got it, Ryan said. They walked over to the helicopter, and Ryan watched it take off, raising a huge cloud of dirt. When the dust settled, he saw Bob heading toward the house. Do you think Elmer might have done away with that Blackstone guy? Asked Sarah, putting the dishes away. Ryan nodded his head. Yes, he said. He was some kind of loose link that needed to be addressed. What a mess, she said. And to think Lisa was part of it all. What a loss. She fooled us all. Ryan noticed she was using her mother's name. For the first time in his memory, she didn't call Lisa Mom. It is, Ryan said. He looked over at little Ryan, who was sitting on the couch watching TV. Glad to see Ryan is up and about. Me too, Sarah said. He worried me so much last night. That Cap guy looked him over last night and said he was fine, but I still want to claw that fool's eyes out for what she did to him. Ryan didn't argue, put his arm around her, and kissed her forehead. I know how you feel, he said. Listen, I need to make some calls. I'll be right out front. Okay, Daddy, she said. FBI Special Agent John Smith looked around at what was left of the camp. It looked very different in the light of day. He remembered the events of the previous evening, looking at the carnage. He shuddered when he saw Elmer in the still smoldering fireplace of the building, where he, Jorge, and Ryan had confronted Jenkins, and was glad Ryan had insisted he leave the building when he did. He knew of the old mercenary's reputation, but he'd never fully realized how evil Ryan could be. He'd seen this kind of thing before while serving in the SEALs, but he'd never seen any of the men he'd served with. As he watched, crime scene investigators were cataloging and packaging thousands of 7.62 mm cartridges, casings he knew were from the minigun Bob had used last night. Part of him sympathized with the poor souls who had come under fire. More than one pile had been found in the compound, and he knew the chances of being able to identify them were slim. There was simply nothing left to piece together. Among the evidence collected were 2 crossbow bolts recovered from the bodies of 2 guards. He remembered firing one of those bolts last night. Are there any fingerprints on these? He asked Jones, looking at the bolts, which were now in separate evidence bags. No, not one, Jones said. Whoever used them knew what they were doing. Smith grunted in response. There's video? They probably had video surveillance installed, Smith said. They had a system installed, but all the cables went through the security booth, and they were cut, Jones said. So no security footage. Smith nodded his head. Ryan was obviously proving to be more clever and meticulous than he'd initially thought. What about tire tracks or shoe tracks? Asked Smith. Forget about it, Jones said. When I got here, the whole road was jammed with cars. They had to bring in a big truck to remove the trees blocking the gate, and there must have been 100 agents and cops stomping all over the place. Any traces that might have been there are long gone. Smith nodded his head, taking in Jones's words. He mentally considered what had been found in the camp. The buildings contained the bodies of many people, some of which had obviously been taken during something bad. He and Agent Jones had discovered a huge cache of illegal substances and weapons. It made him wonder what was really going on here. They also found a treasure trove of DVDs and documents, all of which were bagged and tagged for further examination in El Paso. Several computers were bagged and taken for further examination. Agent Jones approached him and held out a document. He looked it over and saw that it was a list of known casualties. In addition to Colin Blackstone, the entire board of directors of Knight Petroleum was listed, as well as the company's CFO. The list also included 4 names of Mexican nationals, 2 of whom he recognized as known members of a violent drug cartel operating across the border. Why are they here? He wondered. There were 8 unidentified women on the list. Perhaps, he thought, they were night butterflies, either transported across the border or picked up in one of the local towns. Or both. I've already forwarded this to El Paso, Jones said. They will organize all the notifications. They'll also contact the Mexican consulate. Smith nodded his head. All right, he said. What do you think, boss? Did the deal fall through? Asked Jones. Smith looked around before he spoke. Perhaps, Smith said, knowing full well the real story. What would you call it? Jones thought for a moment before he spoke. Judging by the amount of ferocity of the attack and the presence of Mexican nationals, I'm inclined to assume it was illegal substances, Jones said. It could be the work of a rival cartel, and the people at Knight were just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Smith said. Seems logical to me. Smith's calm voice hid the turmoil going on inside him. He'd served his country his entire adult life, first in the Navy on a SEAL team, then as a special agent with the FBI. Now, he was directly involved in covering up his own illegal actions. He pondered the situation as he looked around the compound. He knew how easy it was to break a case. All it took was an incomplete fingerprint, a reflection in a cell phone photo, or a tiny droplet of DNA from someone's saliva. Was Ryan really that good? He wondered. Could he really pull this off without leaving anything behind? Anything else? He asked Jones. Jones shook his head. No, boss, he said. That's pretty much it. All on the way to El Paso. Smith nodded his head. As he pondered this scene, something kept him uneasy. Ryan had said he hadn't seen any cars here. He knew an airplane could hold a maximum of 9 people. The 2 SUVs could hold 10 or 12 people. What about the others? From what he and Jones had seen, there were at least 15 people here at all times. Surely Knight wouldn't have left them here without transportation. And could anyone really hear the gunfire from 12 miles away? Something was wrong here, and he was determined to get to the bottom of it. Okay, let's get out of here, he said. I'm tired, and I could use some sleep. Sure thing, boss, Jones said. Ryan finished making the call and went back inside. Sarah was playing with little Ryan by the pool, and he headed to his office. He knew he had to get rid of all the evidence from last night's raid, so he took apart the guns he and Smith had used, cleaned them thoroughly, and put them in a box. He had to get rid of them, but how? He picked up his desert camouflage and the gloves he was wearing and noticed the dried blood. On his boots, too. He bagged it all up and took it to the incinerator near the pistol range where he burned most of his trash. He put the clothes in the incinerator with the trash and fired it up, hoping that would help. He took the box of gun parts and dug a hole at the range, filling the box with dirt. He knew he'd have to throw the parts elsewhere eventually, but at least this way they'd get out of the house. He came back and had just had time to clean himself up when he heard a car pull up in his driveway. When he looked closely, he saw that it was Sheriff Coltrane. He looked around to make sure there was nothing incriminating in sight, then opened the door and stepped outside. "Good morning, Sheriff," Ryan said as he stepped out onto the porch. "What can I do for you this morning?" Sheriff Coltrane walked up to the porch and held out his hand, which Ryan accepted. "Can I get you anything? Coffee? Tea?" "No. But thanks for asking anyway, Mr. Caldwell," he said. "Do you mind if we talk for a few minutes?" "Not at all, Sheriff," Ryan said. Have a seat. Mind if I light a cigarette? Your house? The sheriff said. Mind if I join you? Help yourself, Ryan said, lighting a cigarette. How's Beverly doing? Asked Sheriff Coltrane. Things are going pretty well, thanks for asking, Ryan said. She's delivering eggs this morning. Yes, I saw her at the Jennings house, said the sheriff. You two get along well? Yes, as a matter of fact, I asked her to marry me, Ryan said. And she said yes. Good for you, Sheriff Coltrane said. Congratulations. I knew you two would get along. He took a drag on his cigarette before continuing. I see you all made it home safely last night. Did everything go well? Yeah, thanks, Ryan said. He knew the sheriff was mocking him, and he was waiting for the other shoe to drop about to drop. Did you see the morning news? The sheriff asked. This is it, Ryan thought. You mean the incident in New Mexico last night? Asked Ryan. Yes, that's right. Interesting that the FBI guy they questioned was the same guy I talked to last night, Sheriff Coltrane said. I looked at my map and noticed that the campground is not far from where I left you last night at the state line. You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you? Ryan shrugged. He looked at the sheriff and tried to read the expression on his face, but couldn't. He thought for a moment and made a decision. He hoped it was the right one. They had my daughter and my grandson, Ryan said quietly. They were going to sell and do God knows what to the boy if the feds didn't give up their pursuit of night petroleum. He looked at the sheriff, but still couldn't read his face. Tell me, Sheriff, what would you do if it was your daughter, your grandson? Well, Ryan, the sheriff said. May I call you Ryan? Ryan nodded his head. I think if it was me, I'd do my best to get them back. The sheriff gave him a hard look before continuing. You know, Ryan, I may be a country sheriff, but I'm no fool, he added, and his West Texas accent was almost gone. Ryan looked at him in confusion. I guessed it was something like that. I realize it's secrecy, but I just wanted you to tell me right away. Ryan nodded his head. So, what are you going to do now? Asked Ryan. Sheriff Coltrane shook his head. There's nothing I can do or say even if I wanted to, and I don't want to, he said. That FBI guy swore me to secrecy, remember? Besides, there's no law against riding in a van late at night. At least not in this county. As far as I'm concerned, if you took out that gang, you did us all a big favor. Ryan chuckled, noticing the accent was back. Who is this guy really? He asked himself. Speaking of law, Sheriff Coltrane added. Have you ever thought about going into law enforcement? Ryan laughed. Viewers, I think you, like the characters in our story, felt the tension and fear, soaked in adrenaline, in this scene. We see how the heroes, despite the tension and danger, continue to go to the end, fulfilling their mission. This part of the story reveals not only the strength of character, but also the deep emotional wounds that many of the heroes carry within themselves. And to be sure to see the next part, I remind you, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Ryan, of course, found himself in a situation where duty and personal feelings collide, requiring him to make decisions that will determine his future. The scene with Elmer, where Ryan finally allows his emotions to take over, shows how deeply rooted his hatred and thirst for revenge are. But despite all this, he maintains his sanity and directs his actions to protect those he loves. This decision, to kill Elmer or spare him, demonstrates the struggle between the human and the beast, between reason and emotion. Psychologically, this moment is critical for Ryan. Killing Elmer symbolizes his release from the heavy burden of the past, but also his inner dark side. It is a reference to how a person can change under the pressure of circumstances, and how important it is to maintain your moral principles even in the most difficult situations. The interactions with his daughter and granddaughter emphasize the importance of family for Ryan. This is not just a rescue operation, it is his way of showing that love and care for loved ones are above all else. Emotional scenes with Beverly and his daughter Sarah demonstrate how strong, but at the same time vulnerable, heroes can be. Smith and the other members of the team also play a key role, supporting Ryan, but also showing their own values and commitment to the cause. The interactions between them emphasize the importance of camaraderie and trust in difficult situations. Now that the worst is behind them, The heroes must realize their actions and their consequences. What will happen next? How will Ryan cope with the burden of guilt and responsibility? What will the team do after completing their mission? The answers to these questions are waiting for you in the next part. Don't forget that the full version of the story is already available on our Patreon, where you can support us and get exclusive materials. Subscribe to be the first to know how this incredible story ends. Thanks for staying with us, and see you in the next part.